The other voice. End of section. The figure appears in the garden as a creature, and the creature has a voice. Not at first a name. That comes very late in the canon, when Revelation 12:9 stacks the 4 titles onto one figure. But here in Genesis 3, just a creature and a voice. The voice does not introduce itself, and it does not claim authority. It comes in lower than that. It asks a question. The previous book already walked this scene from the keeper's angle, the man given a posted sentry charge and failing it, and the gate shutting behind him. This book walks the same scene from the other angle, the voice asking the question, and the precise craft of what the voice does. It is the closest thing the canon gives us to a portrait of how the adversary actually works, and almost every move he is shown making in the rest of Scripture is in this one short conversation, in seed form, so slow all the way down. He is described in 2 words, 2 pieces in that sentence to hold carefully. He is a preacher. The same line that introduces him places him squarely among the made things, not above them. The popular picture has him as a rebel angel and probably stuffed into snake form for the occasion. The text just says creature, and the rest of the verse describes him in terms of his cunning relative to the other animals. Whatever the figure is behind this creature, and we will come back to that, the Genesis text gives him exactly as much as it gives him. A creature, more clever than the others, with a voice and a question. And the cleverness, the word the Hebrew uses, sits on the page next to the man and woman in a way the text wants you to hear. Look closer, the bareness next to the cunning. Genesis 2:25 ends with the man and the woman both arumim, naked. Genesis 3:1 opens with the serpent more arum, crafty, than any beast of the field. The same root, the same sound, set side by side on purpose. Hebrew narrative loves this kind of scene. Arum, arumim, cunning standing next to bareness in the next sentence. And the texture of the scene is set before any of the characters have spoken. 2 human beings open to the world and to each other and to God without shame. 1 creature in among the trees, sharper than they are, and knowing it. The contrast is not a metaphor. It is the opening shot of the whole encounter. The cunning is going to use the bareness, and the bareness is just then the keeper's principal furniture. They have no defense yet, and they have not yet needed one. Hebrew arum is not a moral word on its own. It is the same word used positively in Proverbs of the prudent, the shrewd, the one who sees what is coming. The serpent's cunning is not yet in the verse where it is named evil. It is just sharpness. What the chapter does is show what sharpness uses itself for when it sets itself against the one who made it. The first thing the text says about the figure who will speak is that he is clever, and the first thing he does with the cleverness is craft a sentence. Walk on. The sentence is the famous one, and most readers walk past the craft in it because they have heard it since childhood. Take it slowly. 2 precise edits to what God actually said are doing the work, and both are too small to notice unless you are looking. The first edit is the deletion of the yes. 2 clauses, weighted deliberately on the side of yes, every tree surely eat, with 1 tree set behind a fence. The serpent's question deletes the yes entirely. The garden of permission with 1 fence becomes the garden of prohibition. The abundance has silently disappeared and only the restriction is left in view. He does not argue that God is mean. He frames the conversation so that God appears mean before any argument has been made. The second edit is even quieter. He addresses the woman, who was not yet made when the command was given to the man. Genesis 2:16 through 18, 21 through 23. The command was received by Adam and would have been carried to her secondhand. The result is the small but consequential addition in her reply. She says God forbade them even to touch the tree, 3:3, and that word is not in what God said. The padding is hers, not his. The lie is built on a pad already in place. And it is worth seeing exactly what padding does, because it is going to be the single most consistent move this figure makes for the rest of the canon. Adding to what God said makes the command heavier than it actually is, which makes God seem stricter than he actually is, which makes the fruit's prohibition seem more arbitrary than it actually is, which makes the prohibition easier to resent and then to break. The thicker the fence, the smaller God looks behind it. The thicker the fence, the easier to step through. The first lie in Scripture is set on a small addition. We will see it set on a small addition every other time. Then comes the lie itself, and the craft of it is the part of this scene the popular picture most consistently misses. The serpent does not invent a rival theology. He does not bring competing scripture. He takes God's exact sentence and slips one word into it. Look closer. The first lie built out of God's own words. God's warning in 2:17 is mot tamut, dying you shall die. Hebrew's way of leaning hard on a verb by doubling it on itself, an infinitive absolute parodied the finite form. It is emphatic, almost legal in weight. He says God's exact line, in God's exact grammar, with one negative slipped in. The lie is built out of the truth with a single word altered. This is the operating shape of the move. The rest of Scripture is going to call deception, and it is more dangerous than any cruder lie would have been. A wholesale contradiction can be detected immediately by anyone with the original text in hand. A precise inversion, in the original grammar with one operator changed, will pass for an authentic restatement to anyone who has not held the originals next to each other. Did God really say, plus, you shall not surely die, is not a brutal denial of the word. It is an edit. The figure is introduced, in his first speaking line, as an editor of what God has said, and the rest of the canon never has him doing anything more sophisticated than the same move in different venues. Yeshua's own summary of him in John 8:44 will keep this exact word in view. He is a liar, and the father of lies, tsustes. When he speaks the lie, he speaks ekton idion, out of his own, because lying is what he generates from himself. A lie built out of truth, with one operator slipped in. That is the family resemblance the canon is naming. Walk on. Then the woman looks. The serpent says no more after the inverted sentence. The rest of the scene is done by the fruit. 3 achilles and 3 registers, good for food, the body, a delight to the eyes, the senses, desired to make one wise, the ambition. John, writing thousands of years later, will pick up the same 3, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, the pride of life, 1 John 2:16. And Yeshua, when this figure comes to him in the wilderness, will be tested on the same 3, turn stones to bread, throw yourself from the temple, receive the kingdoms of the world. The bait the figure throws in the garden is the same bait, in the same 3 registers, that he throws every other time. We will get there in a moment. The fruit is taken, and eaten, and handed over, and eaten again. The promised opening of the eyes happens, but it does not open onto wisdom, it opens onto shame. They sow leaves. They hear God walking in the garden and hide. God asks the first question he asks anyone in the Bible, where are you? And the man's answer is not the truth. The answer is blame, running every direction it can. The previous book traced that part of the scene. This book holds its attention on the figure who set it up. He has not been the actor in any of these later moves. The man and the woman acted. The figure went silent the moment the inverted sentence was spoken. He did not need to do more. The infrastructure of the encounter, the edited command, the padded prohibition, the inverted warning did the rest. He is, in the very first scene the canon shows him in, a figure who works by getting other people to do themselves what he wants done. He is not yet acting through a vessel, in the way the Gospels will later describe. He is in this scene the architect of a conversation, and the moves that follow are the man's and the woman's, made inside the architecture he laid. Then comes a sentence that should not be possible in a scene like this. While God is still speaking to the figure, before the man and the woman are sentenced, before any of them has taken a step out of the garden, God turns and addresses the creature directly, and makes a promise that is the seed of every good thing in the canon that follows. The road already walked through this verse in the previous book, but it has to walk through it again here, more closely, because in this book the verse is heard from the other side. 4 pieces in the sentence are doing exact work. Enmity, Eva, God himself, not the man, sets up the war between the woman and the creature, between the creature's seed and hers. The verse names a war the figure did not yet realize he had begun. Seed, Zerah, noun that can mean a line of descendants or one particular descendant, with Hebrew deciding by the pronouns and verbs around it. Here the pronoun is who, he, third person masculine singular, and the verb is singular too, so the seed is being narrowed to 1. Bruise, shuf, a rare verb, occurring 3 times in the entire Hebrew Bible, Genesis 3:15, Job 9:17, Psalm 139:11, carrying no worn idiom. It is used in both halves of the line identically. He shall shuff your head, you shall shuff his heel. Same verb, 2 targets, Rosh, head, and Akev, heel. One kind of blow, 2 outcomes. A strike to the heel is a wound, a strike to the head is an ending. The rest of Scripture reads the verse exactly as it stands. Paul writes that the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. Romans 16:20. The head blow in so many words. He presses the singular itself. The promise, he says, was to the seed, who is Christ, not seeds as of many. Galatians 3:16. And the last book of the canon still has the same two combatants locked together. The great dragon, that ancient serpent, and the woman and the rest of her offspring. Revelation 12:9-17. The promise was made here. It was not kept here. Who he was, the verse did not yet say. The canon will spend the rest of its pages saying it, and it will take a man hanging from a tree to keep the verse word for word. The heel wounded, the head crushed. Walk on. So that is the figure as the canon first shows him at work. A creature with a voice, an edit of God's command, a padded prohibition that the speaker found already in place, an inverted warning, built out of the original grammar, with one operator changed, a 3-register bait that does not need the speaker to keep speaking once it is laid, the man and the woman doing themselves what was wanted, and a sentence from God before any of them have moved, naming the war and the one who will end it. The figure does not get a chapter of backstory, then or later. Genesis does not tell you how he got into the garden, how he came to be cunning, how he ended up at odds with God, or who he was before he was a creature with a voice. The chapter is honest about what it gives and what it does not. It gives the move. It does not give the biography. And then it is dead silent on him for the rest of the Hebrew Bible. Anywhere a popular treatment expects to find further Genesis-style backstory, a fall narrative, a council rebellion, a date of his first sin, the Hebrew Bible is wordless. The road will reach the two passages later Christian tradition mined for that backstory, Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28 when it gets to the movement on the trail, and walk what they actually say. For now, only this: the silence is itself information. The text does not lack the resources to give a biographical chapter. It declines to give one, in the place where the figure first speaks and where any later writer would have backfilled if backfilling had been the point. It is doing something different. It is showing you a move. The move is the substance. Now we have to make one large jump, about 4,000 pages of text and several thousand years of history, very compressed, because the next place this figure shows up in the canon doing the same move, in detail, is a long way later. The Old Testament refers to him as a function in Job and Zechariah and Chronicles, which the previous movement walked. He is heard from in glimpses through the prophets, which we will get to. But the next moment he is shown doing the Genesis 3 move on a real person, with the original grammar laid out next to it, is the wilderness. After Yeshua's baptism in the hill country east of the Jordan, the figure shows up again to do the only thing he has ever been shown doing. And here is where the canon symmetry stops being subtle and starts being deliberate. The second man is in a wilderness, fasting 40 days, surrounded by stones. The first Adam was not alone. The woman was with him. The second man is alone. The first Adam fell against a voice asking a leading question. The second man stands against a voice doing the same thing. Every move the figure makes in the wilderness is the Genesis 3 move in different clothing, and the man being tempted answers each one with the one thing the first Adam did not do. Look closer. The Gegraptai answers, "It is written." The temptation account is in Matthew 4:1-11 and Luke 4:1-13. The figure is named both Ho Diabolos, the slanderer, and Ho Perazon, the tempter. The function titles from the previous movement used here as he is doing the function. He opens each temptation with the same edit move from Genesis 3. If you are the Son of God, a question that pretends to test what God has just said outright, "This is my beloved Son," Matthew 3:17. The same move, 4,000 years older, with the original grammar in view. Yeshua's reply to each temptation is one word and one quotation. The Greek is gegraptai. It stands written, the perfect tense form of grapho, meaning the writing was done and its effect continues. 3 temptations, 3 gegraptai answers, all from Deuteronomy 6 and 8, the very book where Moses set the plumb line against adding or removing from what God said. Deuteronomy 4:2, where the first Adam met the editor and let the woman tad the command. The second man meets the editor and refuses to alter the text by a word. He does not argue, he does not explain, he quotes, "It is written that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God," Matthew 4:4, Deuteronomy 8:3. "It is written, you shall not put Yahuwah your God to the test," Matthew 4:7. Deuteronomy 6:16. It is written, "You shall worship Yahuwah your God, and him only shall you serve." Matthew 4:10, Deuteronomy 6:13. The first man in a garden was given the word, and let it be edited. The second man in a wilderness was given the same word, and refused to let one syllable be moved. And the most important detail is in the middle of the encounter. At the second temptation, the figure himself quotes scripture, Psalm 91:11-12, back at Yeshua, lifting the lines about angels being commanded concerning the Son. He can quote the text. The text being quoted is not a defense against him. That is the deepest single thing this scene teaches about the figure. He reads the same Bible the believer reads, and he will quote it, and a single proof text torn from its surroundings is exactly the tool he prefers. The guardrail is not knowing one verse. The guardrail is the plumb line held against the hole. The same plumb line Deuteronomy 4:2 set down, nothing added, nothing removed. Walk on. Then Luke closes the encounter with a sentence that almost no one notices, and that sets up the rest of the gospel narrative. And when the devil had ended every temptation, he departed from him until an opportune time. Luke 4:13. Not until a random later date, until a moment that is already on the schedule. The figure leaves the wilderness because the wilderness was never the decisive battle. He will be back. The writer says so. We will pick him up again in the Gospels movement and follow him through to the night of the appointed moment, which is the supper in the garden and the cross. The wilderness is the rematch of Genesis 3, and the second man wins it without raising a hand. But the rematch is not the decisive engagement. The decisive engagement is appointed, and Luke is telling you to keep watching. Stand back from the two scenes, and the symmetry is almost embarrassing in its exactness. A garden, a fasting wilderness, a first Adam, a second man, a voice that asks a leading question, a voice that asks a leading question, a command of God in view, a scripture from God in view, an addition to what God said, a refusal to add to what God said, a fruit taken from a tree, a stone left on the ground, a fall, a holding fast, a sentence handed down to the figure, and a promise made about a coming descendant, a promise being kept in the fasting man who turns out to be the descendant. The figure makes the same move both times. What changes is the man who has given it to answer. The road from one scene to the other is almost the entire Bible. The two scenes are bookends, and they are bracketing the whole long story between Genesis 3 and the Gospels with one statement. The move that fell us in the first garden has now been answered, in the wilderness, by the one whom the rest of the road will follow to where the head blow is finally landed. Carry the figure forward from this scene with this much fixed. He is a creature with a voice. He works by editing what God has said, by padding what God commanded, by inverting what God warned, with the original grammar in view. He uses 3 registers of bait: the body, the eyes, the ambition, and once the bait is in the open, he is content to be silent while the one he is tempting does the rest. He can quote scripture as easily as the believer can, and he loses the moment the one he is talking to refuses to add, remove, or edit by a word, and quotes the text back to him in its full counsel. That is who the figure is at work. Hold it. The road turns next to a stranger and louder corner of Genesis, and to the question of what other figures are in the world with him, what the demons actually are, and why the believer the word has come to live inside cannot, in the structural sense Paul names, be entered.